That's when you're learning the world. I mean, that's when the process takes place. You know.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah.
Some real life experiences in Iran. Can you tell us what you did, how long you were there?
Yeah, I was only there for 2 weeks because it's really hard for an American to get a visa. And there are only 2 ways for an American to get a visa from the Iranians these days. One is to go as a journalist, and that can be very hard to get, and you have no idea whether they're going to say yes or no. And the other is to take a KGB tour. KGB tour is 3 cities, 15 monuments, and 2 guides who were provided by the security services. And I was actually about to do that, a commercial one, and a guy at my Tuesday night poker game said he was going to Iran with Scott Ritter. And I said, oh wow, can I go too? And he said, I can't set you up for this trip, but this organization, Fellowship for Reconciliation, does 3 or 4 trips a year, and you can probably go on the next one. So I sent in an application, gave them what to me is a very large amount of money. I think it was $5,000, which pays for the the airfare and the 2 weeks and I went. I found Iran to be the most complex and fascinating country I'd ever been in. I was lucky, it turned out, that a friend of mine from Oxford had a friend who I was acquainted with who lived there, so I was able to break away from the tour. And I met a lot of Iranians and went to parties and went skiing. It's great skiing in Iran. I guess the 3 most interesting things of these, one, it is a totalitarian state. Virtually anybody I met over the age of 35 who spoke English had been in prison. At the same time, it was not like Russia in the old days. People were incredibly outspoken. And, they didn't look around and then go, Larry, I don't like the regime. It was like, I hate the fucking mullahs. They're all corrupt. The Grand Ayatollah is addicted to opium. Which is probably true. Okay? And you keep laughing. It's assumed to be true. Everybody in Iran will tell you that the senior mullahhood are all opium users, and that the Grand Ayatollah, who is infallible like the Pope, except more so, has graduated from smoking to eating opium. He supposedly began smoking opium when the attack on the Iranian parliament back in 81, 83, there was a bomb. A bunch of parliamentarians were killed, and he had his arm shattered in the explosion. Opium's very common there, and quite nice. And the other thing was, I had the odd experience. We were going to visit a synagogue, and this was of political significance because America has been talking about either going to war or, since the army has been used up in Iraq and Afghanistan, bombing Iran. And the ostensible reason is the protection of Israel. And so the conditions of the Jews in Iran obviously has some political import. If they're treating the Jews who do live in Iran reasonably decently, then there's reason to think that they're reasonably decent human beings. If they're treating them horribly, then Ahmadinejad is indeed Hitler, and we can drop a bomb on him. Okay? That's kind of the political issue. So there are 40,000 Jews in Iran, more than any other Middle Eastern country with the exception of Israel. There have been Jews in Iran since the 5th century BC or something like that. So we went to visit a synagogue. And as I told you, this group was mostly Christian. And it was led by Helen. Helen always introduced herself by saying, "I'm a nun and a priest." And she was. She'd been an Episcopal nun, and when they allowed female priests, she then became a priest. I took to calling her sister father, which she didn't find funny, so I stopped. But anyway, Helen came to me and said, "Larry, the people we're going to see, I think they'll be happier if they feel that there's a Jew in our group. Would you be willing to be our Jew?" And, you know, I'm a Jewish atheist, or an atheist Jew, however, whichever one goes in front. And I said, "Sure, I'll be happy to be your Jew." And so we went, and it was in this kind of very working class area, no street lights, very dark. We go into this courtyard, which is very standard Iranian. It was very bleak because it was winter time. Otherwise, probably would have been much nicer because the trees would have been in bloom. And there was this 2-story high building with lots of windows, especially on the first floor, and you could see all the Jews inside praying and davening and singing and talking and kids running around. And women were upstairs because they were Orthodox. And I had this overwhelming sense of identity. I mean, I had to like back away from the group and hide in the shadows because I thought I was going to burst out in tears, which totally surprised me. I don't normally feel that way about my fellow Jews. You know, I like to think of my fellow Jews as fellow stand-up comedians or writers or what have you. But here, you know, I mean, being a Jew in New York or California or Toronto, okay, not a big deal. It's relatively safe, relatively secure. I'm a 3rd-generation atheist on my mother's side, 2nd on my father's side. But being a Jew in Iran, even though they're an officially protected people, they have a seat in Parliament, big poster outside the Jewish Center about that tall, picture of Khomeini saying we are all people of monotheism, so we're all together or something like that. Even so, being a Jew in Iran is an intense thing. How long is the truce going to last? And so I felt overwhelmed, just totally overwhelmed with this sense of identity. You know, which at least taught me something about the sense of identity that we all have with our groups that is way beyond anything that's rational. And sure enough, when we went in, they said, "Do you have a Jew in your group?" Right? So they said, "Yeah, it's him." And got surrounded by people who said, "Are you really a Jew? Are you really a Jew?" I said, "Well, I'm a non-practicing Jew." What's that? So I try to explain that, you know, Jew could be a cultural thing as well as a religious thing, and eventually they kind of accepted that. They'd never heard of such a thing, but they accepted it. I later found out, or a few minutes later, 10 minutes later, somebody else, another member of the group, had informed me that their rabbi had been arrested as an Israeli spy and spent, I think it was 7 years in prison. And then, so I asked one of the guys, I said, "Where's your rabbi?" And he said, "Oh, he went to California." I said, "When?" He said, 5 years ago. So I said, "Well, what do you do for rabbi?" He says, "Well, we do it for ourselves. We do it ourselves, and if we have a problem, we call them on the telephone."